Well, hello everyone, Texie88 here and welcome to another video. And now we're taking a look at Metal Gear Solid, the board game, or to its full title, Tactical Espionage Action Metal Gear Solid, the board game. Published by CMON and in conjunction with Konami Digital Entertainment, who own the rights to the Metal Gear franchise. This is a board game adaptation of the 1998 video game of Metal Gear Solid, which primarily came out for the Sony PlayStation and popularised the stealth genre of video games. And my understanding is that work on this particular board game adaptation began in the latter half of the 2010s. I think it was about 2019, if I remember correctly from what I read, although it had a few hiccups along the way, not least of which was a momentary problem with licensing. But CMON did eventually manage to reacquire the license and continue from pretty much where they left off. And after much waiting, in May of 2024, Metal Gear Solid, the board game, was finally unleashed. So let's have a look at the box. What's inside the box? Here's a booklet containing VR missions. Now, in the original video game, the VR missions were essentially training missions, whereas in this you can go to any one of the VR missions at any time, even if you've got a Shadow Moses campaign in progress. This Shadow Moses campaign contains all of the campaigns that equate to the story in the original 1998 video game, albeit with some tweaks made to get the game to work in board game form. But each mission in there clearly tells you what's required to set up each scenario, what characters need to be controlled by the player or players, bearing in mind that the first two missions in the Shadow Moses campaign are for Snake only. But even if you've got more than one player, bearing in mind that Metal Gear Solid, the board game, can be played by 1 to 4 players, you can still have more than one person around to try to perhaps take it in turns to control the player character in those first two missions, just to get the hang of how it all works. But that's the Shadow Moses campaign, and everything you need to know about the missions in that, and all the other extra bits and bobs required for each mission, and special rules for each mission and so forth, are clearly explained there. But even if you've got a Shadow Moses campaign in play, you can still go back to a VR mission at any point, whether it's to brush up on your sneaking skills, or whether it's to take on the VR equivalent of some of the boss characters familiar from those who've played the 1998 video game, as you can gain additional equipment for defeating VR versions of the different bosses in a VR mission. And codecs, from anyone familiar with the 1998 video game will know what the codecs are. Sometimes you can gain additional information about something by calling up members of your team remotely via the codec system. And some of the aspects of the board game have a codec number, and if you wanted to look it up, you could, because there'd be a numerical reference that contains either a 1 or 2 digit number, then a full stop, and then another 1 or 2 digit number, and you'd simply sorry, they're both 2 digit numbers, even if because something like 6 would be 06, so if you were asked to look up if you wanted to look up something about a particular weapon or equipment card, say, and you wanted to look up its codec, then you'd simply look up the equivalent codec number in here to find out a bit more about it and how it works and so forth. And of course, there's the rule book. Even though there's a rule book, the earlier missions in the Shadow Moses campaign book also effectively act as a brush up on what's in here. There's free CMON content and the QR code there. The tile representing one of the bosses. These are just plastic bags that these punch cards were in. Not everything's been punched out of these because I haven't actually needed to use them yet. I'll only punch them out as and when I need to. And now we're starting to get to the nitty-gritty of the actual board game. We've got several double-sided floor tiles here. And they're all they're all numbered with a number and either letter A or letter B. So if a mission asks you to have 1A as one of its tiles, then you'd pick this one. If it was asked 1B, you'd look for the number 1, flip it over, and that would give you the 1B. So that's how every single floor tile in this board game works. There's another boss, the tank. Anyone who's played the 1998 video game will know exactly what that's all about. There are some slightly smaller floor tile cards. One side of this is also another boss tile, the helicopter. But the other side of it, if necessary, represents the floor. Here we've got the 4 character cards for the 4 protagonists. Solid Snake is the character you were able to control in the original video game, and his Meryl Silverburr. Otacon, the computer hacker, and Grey Fox, the cyborg ninja. And everything you need to know about what kind of actions they can do is clearly listed. And it tells you not only the actions that the character can usually take, and a rundown of how a player's turn works. In this case, you reclaim all action tokens. I'll get onto the action tokens in a moment. And performing up to 4 actions. And the action token, and each action has a number in the upper left corner. And that's how many action tokens is required to do that particular action. You can do the same action more than once in a turn. So if you wanted, every player has 4 player tokens corresponding to the character they're controlling. And so if you wanted to do 4 sneaks, you can. If you wanted to do 4 dashes, you can. As you can see, some of the actions you can do require 2 tokens. So if you use 3 tokens elsewhere, then you won't be able to do either of those 2. This one has an X because how many focus tokens is required depends on what happens. I'll get to the focus tokens in a moment, and also each character has some unique abilities, and some of them have those green codec numbers. As I mentioned earlier, if you wanted to find out more information about that particular aspect, you'd simply go to that codec manual I showed you a few moments ago, and in this case, you'd be looking up the codec for 712 to find out more about Snake's sneak attack. And the abilities down there differ from one character to the other, but there's the different characters start with different items. Initially, Snake starts with nothing, but every time you complete a mission, be it in the Shadow Moses campaign or in one of the VR missions, you unlock another equipment card. There's a whole bunch of equipment cards which are numbered, and you'd simply be able to add the equipment cards with the matching number to a memory box. I'll get onto that later as well. And here we've got some boss dashboard info cards. They tell you how they tell you what, all sorts of things about them, the boss in question, how they move, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and they've got us, and most of the many of the bosses have a VR equivalent. So for instance, his Psycho Mantis. This is the version used during the Shadow Moses campaign, but if you're having to take on Mantis in a VR mission, then you'd be looking at the VR mission side of the card instead. Because the behaviour of the VR mission versions of the bosses is rather different. And here's a guard dashboard card, which is used only in regular sneaking stages, where the only enemies, the only mobile enemies are enemy guards. And it's just a little dashboard where you can keep guard order and guard reaction packs organised somewhat. And you've got a little clear plastic insert to keep everything as neat as possible, although it does a varying job of that. So if you were hoping to get some more plastic bags to contain the components, then ideally you really want to be doing that if you can. These are some add-on barracks. Some of the floor tiles have security guard barracks in them, but some of them you have to either overlay this over a specific room as dictated by a particular mission map, or it'll just be tagged onto the side of a floor tile. That'll be clearly marked in the mission parameters. These usually go alongside a particular floor tile, and those are lift shafts or elevator shafts if you're in the United States, and this is the lift or elevator itself, and whichever floor it was on is where the actual lift would be. And here are our protagonists: Solid Snake, Grey Fox, Meryl, Otacon, and Meryl. Whoever's controlling Meryl will also have access to a different version of her in which she's disguised as an enemy guard, which allows her to wander around in front of guards with little worry, as long as none of the guards catch her doing anything other than walking or using or refreshing focus tokens. and is these two things here, but cardboard boxes. They were a hiding mechanism in the original 1998 video game, and they made it into the board game as well. Although you do have to find the equipment card, have to earn the equipment cards to unlock them before you can even think about using them. And these red characters of the different humanoid boss characters. I say humanoids because, as you saw earlier, there are things like the helicopter and the tank which aren't humanoid, and all these are just enemy guards. And in Metal Gear Solid, the board game, the direction that enemy guards face does matter. And they've even got a little pointy arrow on the front of them, making it very clear which way they're facing. Here we've got a collection of red and black dice, which are numbered like regular six-sided dice, with the notable exception that on the white dice, where there'd normally be a number 1, there's instead the famous red exclamation mark. And this little transparent red cube is used with some of the boss battles whenever there's something like a threat level, which you need to use that to mark the actual gauge, which is on the boss's character card. Not all bosses have them, but some do. But if you need to, if it does have a table like that, then this little red cube is what you use to track the level of whatever gauge is being monitored on that particular one. These are solid snakes for action tokens, which I mentioned earlier. The idea is you'd place action tokens on the actions that were on Snake's character card. This is something that's used to determine which way security cameras are facing. Here's an example of a security camera, and as you can see, on the security cameras, there's two different directions they can face: the green direction and the orange direction. And from time to time, the players will have an instruction to flip this camera direction card over. This is kept nearby the playing area, and it's used to monitor which way all the security cameras are facing at any given time. And this is just something that's kept alongside any floor tiles for a particular sneaking mission. They're not used in boss missions because it's not required. What this does is to guide us to which order the guards on the floor tiles move. So you'd be starting in the top left corner of a particular floor tile and moving from left to right and activating the guards in that order. These letter tiles with A, B, C and D on them. These represent various different things depending on the mission. They're not used in all missions, but whenever they are, the mission parameters clearly indicate what they represent. A couple of exit doors. Now these black hexagons with the number 1 on them, these are used to track how much damage a player character has sustained. As you may have seen in the bottom left corner of the character dashboards I showed you earlier, each player has 4 health points, and this can be used to track how many points of damage they've taken. If they amass 4 of these at any given time, then their character is dead, and usually that means that the mission that all players were currently working on is an instant fail. These are a similar thing, but they are used to track how much damage a boss has taken. or you can it can be also or you can also place them alongside enemy guards in regular sneaking sections, because each enemy guard usually has 2 health points, so you can also use those if you've managed to actually harm a particular guard without killing it. And the hexagons with the number 1 just have a 1 on both sides, whereas there's some slightly larger ones that have a 5 on one side and a 10 on the other. And you can simply use whichever side's appropriate to determine how much damage has been done to a particular boss. And there are all sorts of different also being kept in this particular chamber of the insert. We've got a few grenade markers. And typically, you might have these if you actually unlocked the grenade, so you can monitor how many grenades you've got left to use in a particular mission. After all those have gone, you can't use that for the rest of that mission. And here's a rocket that's used for some weapons, such as the Nikita missile launcher. Another of those grenades. These are ammo tokens for certain firearms, such as assault rifles. You might get a card that says that the assault rifle allows you to use that gun 3 times during a mission, and each time you use it, one of the bullet tokens placed on that particular equipment card will be discarded, and obviously ammo drains on those once such an equipment card has had all its ammo used up, then it cannot be used for the rest of that particular mission. These are markers for some of the equipment that Grey Fox and Otacon can start with, because both of them have capabilities that use those kinds of power, such as being able to cloak themselves. This is something that's used in one of the boss battles. I can't really explain what it is because it'll give it away for people who've never played the original video game. These are just some components that are used in one or two of the missions. They're double-sided depending on their active or inactive side. These skull tokens are used to represent a dead enemy. So if a person managed to kill an enemy guard, or even the VR equivalent of a boss, as I mentioned earlier, then you'd replace their figure with one of these on the floor tile. And as in the original video game, there is a risk of certain misfortune happening if an enemy guard stumbles upon a dead body. These are double-sided. They've got 2 stars and one star, and these are used to represent knocked out guards. If you manage to knock out but not kill a guard, then you'd replace their figure with this, and eventually you reach cards telling you to flip this over, and the next stage after that, with a card with a similar instruction, would be that guard would regain consciousness and go back to their regular duties. These are used in one of the boss battles. There's that Sniper Wolf, one of the bosses, and these are targeting reticles for Snake and Meryl. There's also one for Grey Fox, but I haven't popped that out because at the time of recording this video, I've never actually used Grey Fox in that particular mission. And these are also used in that particular mission. There are some more of these which haven't been popped out of the punch cards because if there were more than a set number of players, then there'd be more of these tokens. Some of them blank, one of them has Sniper Wolf on them, and that's how you determine where she actually is in the stage in which she gets taken on. These are attention tokens with a picture of each of the 4 controllable characters, and each one has an attention side and an alert side. An attention side is primarily used if that particular person was caught making a noise. As in the original video game, it's often best in the sneaking missions if you try and avoid making too much noise, and some of the actions you can take have a sound symbol next to them, which means you risk noise. And for each noisy action a player takes, once they've used as many of their 4 actions as they wish to, they'd have to roll 1 white die for each noisy action they took. If they rolled even just 1 exclamation mark, then that means they've been heard, and that the nearest guard will investigate, and they'll put the attention side of their particular attention token underneath their figure. So if they don't want to risk getting caught, they better make themselves scarce on their next available turn if they possibly can. These are the focus tokens for the different characters. There are 4 focus tokens for each of the 4 different controllable characters, and they've got the character's picture on. So, for instance, these 4 can only be used by Meryl. And they're things like giving her a potential 5th action, being able to add 2 to any rolled die for whatever reason, being able to add a white die to any particular dice roll, and the ability to add or deduct 1 from any rolled dice, any one rolled die. And here are the 4 used by Grey Fox. The ability to deduct 1 black die from any roll for any reason. The ability to add 2 to the number on any rolled die. The ability to add or deduct 2 from any rolled die. Or if Grey Fox did 1 dash during his turn, which is one of the actions that all 4 of the characters have, then they can add 2 to the number of squares that they can normally go in that one particular dash. Otacon has plus or minus 2 from any 1 rolled die. Similar thing, but plus or minus 1. Reroll any 1 black die. Add a black die to any roll that his character is about to do. And the 4 for Snake are add 2 to any rolled die. Reroll any 1 die. Deduct 2 from any rolled die. And this one, you can be used to either remove 1 white die from a roll that's about to happen, or a free sneak action. And the idea is that if you use a focus token for whatever reason during your turn, you flip that particular one over, and you can see a number there. Do you remember on the character dashboard cards, the focus option just had a letter X instead of a number of action tokens? Well, this is why, because that number there determines how many action tokens is required to be allowed during a turn to be allowed to flip it back over to its active side so it can be used once again. This one also only requires one action token to bring it back to being usable once it's been used. This one, for instance, requires 2 focus tokens to bring it back after it's been used previously. And here are focus tokens, 4 focus tokens for Grey Fox, Otacon, and Merrill. Now, these 5 grey question marks tiles are traps. 2 of them are security cameras. 2 of them are security laser grids, and 1 of them is a red herring and is nothing. These are used in some of the missions, and these things which look like files of some kind. What they're used for depends on the actual mission. Sometimes they're just files that you collect for whatever reason. Other times, the fact that some of them have a red cross and some have a green tick on the other side might come into play. Again, if the cross and tick is required for any reason in a mission, then the mission parameters will specifically say this. So you will always know whether or not you need to use the cross and tick side or not. These are various different sorts of locked security doors, or sometimes just regular security doors that are not locked, but the players would have to do an interact to get to the other side of them. And if they were locked, if they were initially locked as dictated, again, which side of them would be used would be dictated by the mission parameters and the mission map. But if, for example, a person wanted to open this locked security door, they'd have to do repeated interacts until during their turn they rolled a 5 and a 1 with 2 of the interact dice that they rolled. And if they did that, then depending on the mission, that door would either be completely removed from the map, or it would be flipped over to the regular security door side. And some of them have higher numbers on than others. The higher numbered ones are more difficult to open. In fact, the one with the level 5 doesn't have any dice on the way the 3 and the 4 do. If there is a locked door with a level 5, then usually that means that someone has to be controlling Otacon and be able to hack a computer terminal to be able to remotely unlock it with suitable system cards. And speaking of which, these are the 4 different computer terminals, and hacking. Only Otacon can hack them, but that works much the same way as opening the security doors, such as the ones I showed you, which have dice depicted on them. And once during a turn that the requisite dice have been rolled as per the top of the tile, then you'd simply flip this computer terminal tile over to show that it's now in its hack stage, and then Otacon would be able to start looking at files on it to do certain things like manipulate the guards in certain ways, or move a character's attention tokens, remotely unlock doors, and the like. And there are also 3 regular security cameras. Again, those work just like them. Those work depending on that security camera direction tracker tile that I showed you earlier. You know, that big one which had a green side and an orange side. And you've got various different cards. Got some guard reaction cards. Annoyingly, these have got a bit mixed up. There's some special cards for different bosses and boss behavior cards of various kinds. some of the boss battles have an overlay that people will put over a specific players will put over a specific part of their player dashboards to cover up some of the actions that they will not be able to use during that particular battle. But whether or not that happens depends specifically on the boss you're dealing with. And there's a disguised Meryl reference card that obviously only Meryl uses. Remember, I mentioned that she has the potential to disguise herself as a security guard, and that goes into detail about how that tour works. And these system cards, you'd only have these out if any character was controlling Otacon, and those system cards would come into play if Otacon managed to successfully hack a computer terminal. Boss stage reference card and different weapons. There's some of those. And there's some more of those computer system style cards, which have the different dice on, and much like hacking terminals and interacting with the locked security doors, you'd have until the end of your turn to be able to roll the numbers shown. These are all behavior cards for some bosses. And these are guard order cards. Some of the guard reaction cards have been inadvertently mixed in with them. They're not supposed to be there. There are only 6 guard reaction cards, and what those do is they tell you what happens if a guard lands on an attention token, an alert token, a knocked out guard, or a dead body, and it tells you what happens and how the guard behaves and so forth. Very simple. Now, when it comes to the different and these are starting equipment cards. Only if these are starting equipment for the depicted characters, such as Otacon here and Meryl here, only those characters can use those particular equipment cards, and if they wish, they can start with those. They might want to substitute 1 or 2 of those cards for something else that have been amassed through being unlocked via the completion of previous missions. It's up to the actual player in question whether or not they do this. But anyway, back to these guard order cards. There are 7 red ones and several different bluey green ones. Each mission that requires guard order cards. It's only boss battles which wouldn't use them, but guard order cards are effectively AI, how the guards how far the guards can move and which way they turn at junctions and so forth. And here's an example of one. This is one that would instruct knocked out guards to gradually come round. So any that currently had the 2-star side, like I showed you earlier, if anywhere on any of the floor tiles there was one of these, a card showing this as its first entry would be telling them to turn that over to its 1-star side, and any that were already 1-star side when this card was turned over would become conscious guards, and then the token would just be replaced with an actual guard figure. This is an instruction to change the direction of the security camera, so you'd simply flip over that security camera facing token I mentioned earlier. And these dictate how far each guard will move. if there's an alert token anywhere on a guard's active tile, then they will go 5 squares using the shortest distance with the fewest corners to go towards that particular token. If there's any other reason, then they'll move the blue number shown here. If they've caught sight of a dead or knocked out guard, then they will head that many towards that. But if they're just on regular patrols, then whenever they reach the junction where they got a choice of turning left or right, then this arrow here will tell the players which direction each guard will face. And the way it works is that the 7 red guard order cards are always at the bottom of a guard order pile, and once you've reached these, then that's when things start to get a bit panicky, because one of these red guard order cards is just a card that says game over, and if you ever at any point reveal that particular card, then the results speak for itself. All players have failed that particular mission, and they'd have to do it again and repeatedly do it until they successfully completed the mission objectives. And one of these packs of cards is also the one that contains the equipment cards, which I mentioned earlier, and which brings me to the memory box card. Every time you unlock an equipment card, you can stick it in here, so you always know which equipment you have and haven't unlocked. So between missions, you can side switch between it. There are things like rations, which you might want to take with you, particularly again if you're going up against a boss, because rations allow you to remove two points of health damage. Remember, I showed you the black tokens earlier. If, for example, your character had sustained 3 health tokens and you had rations, then when it was your turn, you could use the requisite number of action tokens to use the rations, and that would enable you to remove 2 health points of damage, so increasing your character's longevity. So that, in a nutshell, is the rundown of the contents of Metal Gear Solid, the board game. And at the time of writing, I've played several missions and even had the chance to test it in a public board gaming session with 4 players, with just doing one of the random VR missions, just to see how it was, and that was superb. The designers have done a really good job of adapting the board game to not only work with more than one player, but also everything works so well, and you can even play it solo. I mean, it is a shame that unfortunately Snake's action tokens have faded somewhat. So my advice to anyone who's thinking of buying Metal Gear Solid, the board game, is, as far as possible, try and handle these with the edges so you don't have the picture on it fading the way these ones for Snake have faded. That kind of annoyed me, because they were fading like this within a month of me actually having first started playing this, which is a bit frustrating, to say the least. But that's pretty much the contents of Metal Gear Solid, the board game. As I said, it's an adaptation of the 1998 video game of the same name. And it does a phenomenally good job of adapting it. the fact that they managed to keep in the stealth aspect that made the original video game such a hit. And a lot of that works because, as I pointed out earlier, the direction that Guard's face does matter. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to catch you on another one soon. Texie88 out.